Welcome, everybody, to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle here at Still and Moving Center. So I'd like to introduce to all of you someone whom Robin Rohr introduced to me. Her name is Brynn Foster. She grew up in California originally, and she had very little connection at that time. Or during a lot of her growing up, she didn't have very much connection with her great-grandmother, who was pure Hawaiian. And she had a remarkable original experience that then unfolded, such that she has now a great connection with Indigenous agriculture. The Indigenous agriculture of Hawaii in particular. And she has also made connections with Indigenous agriculture on the mainland as well. She has a company that's called Voyaging Foods, meaning that the foods that she helps grow and process are the kinds of foods that voyaging Polynesians would have taken on their canoes or would have brought to the Hawaiian Islands via canoe. And she really has quite a remarkable unfolding story that is connected with our theme for this week, which is making time for nature to speak. And that's really the theme that we will all be able to, I think, approach, is this idea of making time for nature to speak, which is what Brynn did and what set her out on her life path so far in terms of Indigenous agriculture. So, Brynn, it's just a great honor and privilege to welcome you here to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions.
Thank you so much for having me, Robin. Thank you for connecting us.
So we wanted to have a chance for us to do just a little bit of a kind of conversation back and forth between Robin and myself between Brynn and myself to get us started. And I currently am in California, by the way, and my mom's kind of Spanish, Mexican, American type house. And I have a mirror behind me that makes me feel as if I'm some sort of harvest goddess thing with a headdress on. So I feel that there's a certain appropriateness that happened when I just plop myself down to start this meeting. Brynn, can you tell us about the event where you felt as if you were particularly connected with and listening to nature, and a little bit about what unfolded from that time?
I remember specifically when I, sort of had this aha moment about, the Hawaiian indigenous plants like taro and sweet potato. And I was at a field trip with my son, who was about 2 years old, or 1.5, 2 years old. And we went on outdoor field trips as like a mom and baby kind of, field trip or school without walls. And it was called Field Trip Friends Hawaii, and Cindy McFarland, it was her company. And I I'm so grateful for her to really give us that experience of listening to nature. We got out as, moms and babies together, and she taught us all about the ahupua'a, and I grew up in California, so I didn't learn any of these important ways that nature and humans have a reciprocal relationship. So I still say thank you so much to Cindy McFarland for giving me that experience. But she took us up to Alo'i at Honolulu Falls, and we learned from an amazing farmer who lived on the land with his children and a cow. I remember seeing this most beautiful scene I'd ever seen. And he really taught us about the history of kalo and how we are connected as a culture to kalo. And then we, also eat it, but it also helps purify, or Taro be a filter, is also a climate mitigator. So all of these things, I was just like, remembering being in Alo'i, bare feet, he was giving us chants, and we were just really integrating in the land, but also within, you know, our cells and our DNA. And I had no idea that that was happening, but I was really listening to nature through touch, through taste, because he was also letting us try some of the poi that he makes, through sound. He was, you know, we were chanting some chants and some songs, and so listening to nature was really integrating, and I just had the most profound experience. And this was supposed to be for my child, but I was here, you know, the mother, having these amazing this experience, which really changed my life. And so, you know, I was just being in the waterfall and just seeing like the perfect scenario of life, in my view, was happening. And then he gave us some, you know, a cutting or a huli to take home to our house and plant it in our home garden. And so I went and I did that at night, and I just had the, you know, most profound experience being up there. And then he also was telling us the water issues that they were having and some land rights, and that it wasn't just this pretty picture, but there was actually some, you know, things involved. And I just couldn't believe that that could be happening. You know, I went home that night and planted the huli, and was woke up in the middle of the night from a dream that that woke me up and changed my life pretty much forever. And the dream was, you know, actually I smelled the smell of this amazing earth smell, and I just put it together that this was, you know, kalo, and this was something I had to do, is be more involved in the planting and the you know, being another voice in eating more kalo, planting more kalo, and any way that I could do that was what I was going to do the rest of my life. And after I had that dream, I remembered when I was, you know, a little girl, that my great grandmother had given me a cookie made with poi. So it was a young girl living in California and not knowing anything about Hawaii or Taro. You know, she was very adamant about me eating this cookie. And I remembered how strange that was, because I didn't like sweets. I certainly didn't like cookies, and I couldn't stand anything purple. And so I just was, you know, did not want to eat it. But so she really introduced me to my culture through that cookie. And that was the seed that she had planted in me that sprouted many years later when I had kids, and actually went into the lo'i. And so, you know, for me, listening to nature, when, you know, how nature speaks, it's not always through words, or, you know, there's different ways that nature speaks. And to me, it was through smell in the very, very beginning, because it woke me up out of a dream, and it was clearly the smell of soil, of, you know, microbial life happening. And I never forgot it. And it was so strong that it sort of changed my life forever.
Mm-hmm. And so Aloe is a kalo patch or growing place, and kalo is taro.
Yeah.
And from that root, the Hawaiians make poi. Did I get all that right?
Yes. You can grow taro or kalo to, you know, different ways, dry land or wetland. And the wetland is typically called a lo'i. So they use the flooded fields. You know, dry land is another way that you can grow it as well. So yeah, kalo is the Hawaiian root for taro. And taro is, you know, planted everywhere in the world. And I'm in California, and I just got back from Arizona, and I saw taro in Arizona everywhere. So it can be grown anywhere.
Oh, quite remarkable. And then you have been using that kalo or taro in what kinds of ways?
Well, for me, I started using it as a flour because I was feeding my baby gluten-free. He wanted to start teething as a baby, and I have a family history of allergies. And at that time, 16 years ago, you know, I was researching a lot of kind of grain-free, you know, gluten-free, and how the wheat was processed was concerning to me, and I wanted, unbleached and wheat, and it was really hard to find in baked goods. So I started to make a flour out of dehydrated poi, and then use that as a gluten-free flour replacement. And just sort of tinkering around in my kitchen, like a lot of recipes do when you're in need of a specific product or meal replacement. And I started making gluten-free teething biscuits from grounded taro root.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, that's why I believe it was, divinely led. It was a seed that had sprouted from my great grandmother, because I know, I know this is a gift from her, from my ancestors, because I had it just started to come in dreams. And why aren't you making flour out of this? And then I started to research it, and it was, a product that King Kalakaua had made in the 1800s as something that we exported in Hawaii. And so my goal was to bring this back so that people can eat it, that especially had food allergies and kids that had autism. I had, been researching back then that, a lot of kids were seeing some helpful changes, and taro is so good for your gut health, and all of it made sense. And so for me, that's how I started, was because of a need from an allergy in wheat.
That gives us a nice start, I think, for a conversation in regard to this idea of taking time for nature to speak. It spoke very loudly to you, and I can almost imagine it happening to myself, having had the opportunity one time to help weed a kalo aloe that was growing kalo, and it was mud filled, and it was a matter of just taking all the weeds out of this field of mud, so that the kalo itself could be planted new. And there was something about being in that mud and, up to my knees, up to my thighs almost, and my hands pulling through the mud. And I just was absolutely exhilarated by a couple hours of doing that. I really didn't want to get out. I wanted to go weed another patch. But yeah, it was a very powerful experience. And I think doing it in Hawaii and feeling as if I was connecting, because it was right next to a heiau, which is a Hawaiian sacred spot, a very, very ancient one. It just made me feel a definite connection with the land and the people of the land being there. And I have no known relatives from this land, and yet I did sense a great feeling of connectedness, and like I say, it was exhilarating.
Well, that's what Ka'ala Farms and Waianae says is, the mud. When you're in the mud, everyone has the same skin color, so it doesn't matter if you're from the land or if you're native to the land. We're all one in the soil. So.
Well, I was with my kumu hula, my hula teacher, when this happened, and her family had been caretaking these loe for a while. And I believe that very same day, her mom, Mary Bird, was with us, and Mary's with us right now. Wonder if Mary has anything that you would like to add.
I remember that day very clearly, Renee. It really was fun. I'm not one of those that gets into the mud, though, but I really appreciated all the hard work that farmers do. Well, every person who has a job in the world is responsible for making our lives better. And I haven't had those aha moments in nature. I've always respected nature. I've always been very glad for nature. I appreciate all that nature has done for mankind and for life on Earth. My mom, she loved all her mango trees. I live on our property in Kaimuki, and she had at one point, she had like 7 mango trees. She has citrus fruit trees. We've got guava trees. So if it wasn't for land, I wouldn't have these beautiful trees who not only feed us, but they purify our air. You know, there are our filters. So, yep, we're very blessed. Amen.
And did you not have what felt like a little communication that came from a mango that fell in your backyard?
It was actually Malia that had the communication. My mom had passed away on a Sunday, and Malia had been working on a mele, a song with her father. And they were just finishing this. My mom died on Sunday, and me, my sisters, and a cousin were here when my mom passed. And it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I'm very grateful that I had that. It was not in a hospital. And with all that's going on with Corona and everything, I just realized I do acknowledge how blessed I was to have that. But Malia and Dave were sitting under the mango tree, and Malia was just finishing the music for this mele, and a mango dropped right on her ukulele, and it hit the strings and bounced off. And Malia commented to her dad, she said, "Oh, I guess we hit it right." So, yeah. And what's really interesting too is the mangoes were blooming and had set fruit and were ripening. This happened in February, and mangoes have seasons. And this particular mango it gave us twice a year, and it had the winter crop, and that's what we were getting. And 2 days after my mom died, she died on a Sunday. On Monday, Malia and Dave completed the mele, and the mango dropped. On Tuesday, all the mangoes on that tree fell. It was like they knew that my mom was gone. And it was amazing. It was just unworldly, but we are connected, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
David, would you like to share some of your experiences of making time for nature to speak?
I have a mango story too.
Oh.
While I was on the Big Island at Kalani, there was a Hayden tree that had produced one single mango. I think I may have told you this story before. But there's a group of people over here playing volleyball, and the Hayden tree is over there, and it's one large, just looked like it was ready to pop mango. And I walked over to it, and I gently placed my hand under the mango. Without touching it, it fell into my hand. It was pure magic. And that's my mango story. Yeah, and I've had certainly many, many occasions to connect with nature growing up in Southern California, and spending a lot of times in the redwoods as well as the desert, and an amazing amount of life under the sea. And I feel quite connected to nature, and I keep as much of it in my home as possible. So I keep they're my pets. Amen.
Do you have a time, David, that you can think of where something that happened in nature? Well, you told us about the mango. I'm not sure what you learned from that, but any other time that your experience taught you a life lesson, so to speak, or changed the course of your trajectory in life? Or
I don't have any major stories that I would say gave me a big turn in life, but each of these small connections with nature continue to remind me of the connectedness that we have with nature, that we are, although we have these prefrontal cortexes and egos, and we tend to think of ourselves as separate, we are not separate from anything else. And those little touches with nature are just gentle reminders of that very fact.
And of course, Brynn, feel free to chime in at any point where somebody says something that you want to respond to.
Can I jump in for a moment?
Sure, please do, Robin.
Thank you. The wonderful theologian that Renee and I both know and love, Matthew Fox, and Brynn, this is so interesting. I'll send it on to you also. Just sent me an article that was written by a great psychiatrist researcher who, in his very long-lived practice, there's two things he recommends for all of his patients, well, not especially for all of them, whether it's mild depression, anxiety, insomnia, PTSD, or severe bipolar, very serious illnesses. And they are glorious music, whatever you deem that to be in your aesthetics, and to be in nature, to walk in nature, to garden. He recommends gardening. And in the last decade, my own mission has been frequency medicine, delivered through very sophisticated biofeedback devices to work with almost 2,000 patients now that have been suffering from chronic intractable pain, and people that had gotten no relief from pharmaceuticals. And we've used frequency medicine with remarkable results. Mm-hmm. And as I've gone forward in my deep interest in frequency medicine, because it's non-toxic, mainly, so much information about the voltage coming from the earth, which is called the Schumann frequencies. Many spas in Europe use that as one of their prescriptions for well-being, where patients walk on grass, plant their feet on dirt, free from pesticides, etc., and just sit for maybe an hour in nature with their feet planted on the ground. And the Schumann frequencies, with the frequency medicine we use, excuse me, in hospital settings and in clinics here, are part of our recipe. So it all goes back to nature. And I came across a real interesting quote by Tesla, the great scientist, researcher, brainiac, if you will, of the 1800s, that so many people stand on his shoulders that are inventors and entrepreneurs. And he has said, frequency medicine will be the medicine of the future. And to me, nature is all about frequencies and frequency medicine. So Brynn, I have a question for you, because I have always found you so fascinating that you, like so many of us, have lives of many, many options. And to see your little petite body in a photograph in a publication a year or two ago in boots, working on the land, I thought was so great. This glamorous young woman doing major acreage gardening and holding this vision, I just thought was such a cool combination. So I have a question for you, Brynn, which is, you know, the science, and actually I'll send on some of the information to you because maybe it even explains, Renee, the joy that you found in your mud bath of a while back, that we are meant to be in nature. We are meant to connect with nature, and the healing realities of the frequencies of nature are very real. And just to wrap up my little verbal contribution here, my life path of what I've seen in the last decade of the work I've been doing, I have a master's in clinical psych, but I'm going on for a doctorate because I want to deal with this notion of frequencies found in nature, frequencies that are so elegant and soothing and healing for the human body, are going to be part of the expanding toolbox of medical modalities now and into the future. So my question to you, wonderful Brynn, is as you work on the land and you grow taro and so forth, could you share maybe with, you know, the other people that work in gardens, that work in farming, experiences that they've had about how it feels, what happens to them in terms of maybe just feeling great peace, feeling exhilaration perhaps at times, feeling a replenishment of energies. And the bottom line for the work we do, and according to Tesla and Matthew Fox's article, is that it all ties into the work that you do, Brynn, because if we are the body electric and the world is filled with frequencies, electrical frequencies, the work that you do is really sacred and healing and remarkable. And I want to know if you've had people over the years, or are you yourself, just by simply working on the land and spending hours in the fields, just some of the feelings or thoughts that come your way, you know, as you have that experience.
I love that you bring up frequency because it's been my whole world lately. And I have just found a machine that you can hook up to a leaf in a plant, and it emits the music from that plant in frequency form. So I am 100% into frequencies. And I think too, going back to, you know, one of the switches is like, some people are like, oh, I don't want to get dirty, it's muddy. You know, I heard that a lot. Like, how can you go and get so dirty and muddy? Well, you know, there's a lot of people that go to spas and they get mud treatments, or they go into mud baths. And then I thought, I don't know if they're connecting the two. You know, you're paying all this money to go get volcanic, you know, like in Napa, there's all these mud bath spas. And I just thought, wow, I can get that for free in Hawaii. I don't need to pay all this money to go and slather it all over myself. I can do all of this at once and, you know, heal my body, get free mud, and all those, you know, minerals and everything is something so important. And that's why it's so important to have pure water and clean soil and these things, because, you know, when we realize how connected we are, you know, I always consider myself a plant almost, because the same minerals, you know, when we are looking at planting food, we want to plant in the soil. We ought to look at how are we taking care of the soil, not just the plant. And when we think about that, what are the vitamins and minerals that are needed for that soil for the plant to uptake, and then we ingest that, and that's all the minerals, the nutrition, the frequencies, because that's what plants are, is they're light. And us eating this light is really what it's all about, the frequencies. And so I just love that you're talking about that, because that's my whole world right now. And feeling, when I don't feel very well, or I'm knocked off of my balance, the first thing I'll do is go and ground in the soil, or even in the sand or the ground, because I think that's a lot of what I've read is a lot of people have disease. We're standing in these shoes that aren't connecting to the ground, to the soil, to the earth, concrete, all of those things. But when we take off our shoes and ground in the soil, feet and our hands in the soil for 20 minutes in the morning, seeing that sunshine first thing, that's the best way of getting vitamin D. All of that puts our body back into balance. So yeah, it all makes sense, in the
Perfect.
soil, in the land.
Thank you so much. Brynn, I think I have Sarah Hodges wanting to share something with us. I know she's quite a lover of being in nature.
Hi. Yeah, I hopped on here on the tail end, but everything that's being said very much resonates. And I personally believe that nature's our sorts of rebalancing. We have this natural ability to our physical body, our energetic, our vibrational body has a natural ability to heal if it's given that chance and isn't being bombarded as we are in kind of the common structures and rhythms of modern society that can have a tendency to do that. And I was thinking the other day that I wonder if psychologists still prescribe this, because I think it was something of the past that they would tell the patient who had some ailment, go to the countryside, go to the shore side. And I wonder if they still do that, or if it's all talk therapy now. And I think that's one of our medicines, is go step foot in nature, put your hands on a tree, whatever it may be for the individual. But there is such a beautiful power there. Thank you, Brynn, for what you're sharing.
Oh, thank you. My dad is a psychologist, so I'm gonna make sure he tells his patients to do that. It's important.
Yeah. Cliff, I know that you're somebody who really finds so much regeneration, spending time in nature every single day if you can.
Well, I wanted to ask Brynn a question from my small experiences with Taro. I just recently finished a project over on the Hana Highway on the Kenai Peninsula, where everyone's growing, there's all these taro fields there. And this couple that I met over there, Uncle Isaac and Auntie Joyce, I think they're in their 80s, and yet they have the energy of people in their 20s or something. It's incredible. They're out there farming taro all day long. It was breathtaking to watch them and get to know them. They're truly salt of the earth people, just the most wonderful people ever. But their energy level was absolutely off the charts. And then I do a lot of kind of endurance athletic stuff, like running marathons and paddling canoes across channels and stuff like that. And I've never been able to use those gels that they sell, those modern gels, but I found that if I use poi and honey mixed together, that not only could I digest it, I would have a tremendous boost in energy after a number of hours running or paddling. So I was just wondering what you thought of the energetic properties of taro, and its youth-giving properties possibly for this couple over on Maui.
Oh, I think it's 100%, athletes having that complex carbohydrate, and it doesn't, make your blood sugar spike. So it's all of those good things. So yeah, it should be in every Ironman or runner's, pocket, because it gives you that long lasting energy and won't, make you spike and crash. So it is maybe a secret that maybe just, us can have. We just, or give it to everybody as well. We want to share it. But I do think that poi with honey is such a great, endurance trail food, I guess you could say, or voyaging food. That's why we talk about it being, it doesn't need refrigeration really. You just keep it out because it's fermented and all of these amazing things. And I do think that, also farming in the land, there are a lot of people I know that farm taro, and they're beautiful people because they're so connected to this amazing plant, and it's a life-giving plant. And it's also, so tied to the history and culture of Native Hawaiians. There's a lot more spiritually and culturally that is connected, that we all, talk about frequency, it's off the charts frequency, sacred plant. So I would love to see everyone plant and have taro in their home, whether it's even in a little, container garden or what. But I just think that, taro is the answer to so many of our, it rebalances us, even just having it around. And I'm sure someday science will catch up to that and say, oh yeah, because it's a special secret frequency that we all never heard of.
We have Donna Moore and Robert Moore in Santa Barbara, California, and both of them keep a wonderful garden. And wondered if either one of you would like to speak of your connection with nature. Donna maybe more with the land, and Robert maybe more with the water. He is surrogate uncle to our boys, and is largely responsible, along with their dad, for teaching them to surf. And so if either Donna or Robert would like to give a word here.
I have a question.
Great.
Some years ago, I had the opportunity to hear a young Chumash woman. Chumash are the indigenous peoples from around the area in California where we live, speak about, she called it Zone 1 Indigenous Healthcare. And her contention, and I've heard this before as well in other places, was that within 50, maybe 100 miles of where any person lives, you can find plants, different plants, plants here that are different from plants in Hawaii or Polynesia or on the East Coast or in Europe, but they can heal the same illnesses. Does that make sense? In other words, they have the different, completely different plants can exhibit the same healing properties as other plants, and that you find them, you can find them within an area that can be accessible to everyone. So everyone where they live can find healing plants with properties that can cure the same illnesses that we share around the world. So number one, I was wondering, just for clarification, this idea of, which I love, of voyaging plants, is taro a voyaging plant? Did taro come originally from Polynesia and was brought to Hawaii?
Yes, taro is one of the original, I like to reference them as canoe plants, and there's a great website, canoeplants.com, that has a lot of that information, as well as the Hokulea Polynesian Voyaging Society has a lot of that information, and lists a lot of those plants. And it is definitely one of the indigenous plants that they brought on their open ocean voyaging canoes.
Well, this whole idea of having plants that are indigenous or endemic to your own area, where they have their own pollinators and they have they have their own pests and their own pollinators, and there's a certain balance.
Mhm.
But this idea of voyaging plants is all over the world now. Plants from everywhere are taken and introduced all over the place, such that here in California, where we have such limited water resources, we're growing rice in the Central Valley. So I'm wondering about this idea. Do you have the virtues that you're mentioning about poi, and Cliff brought up about poi? Do you have any experience with plants in other areas that have similar properties that people could rely on? I don't know what I think. Maybe you have some thoughts about this idea of transporting plants from one place to another place and ending up, at least in a material world, a materialized world, where you end up with very few plants that are providing us with our food.
Well, I think the most interesting thing about that is within one plant, for lack of a better word, we'll just say taro, there's a lot of different varieties within that plant. Like rice, there's a lot of different varieties. So even if you just say, let's just focus on rice, the varietals within that are so important to regions and to areas for so many different reasons. And it's called, creating a biodiversity. So when you plant many different varieties, you don't have to worry about a lot of pests and things because it takes care of itself. And that's why monocropping is, such a, even if you monocrop, well, it's like say rice, and you grow all these different varieties, the pests have, those varieties have different properties within those that maybe one pest can't attack, the black rice and the green rice and pink rice. So yeah, I think that's what's so interesting is different regions will have plants that have many different varietals within that plant. And that's why taro is so amazing, because taro is grown throughout the world. It's everywhere. It's in Africa, China, Southeast Asia, South America. It's everywhere. There's different varieties within that. Well, Hawaii has, these specific varieties that ended up, growing specialized within Hawaii. So, that's what I'm focused on, is really the Hawaiian varieties. But you can find so many different varieties of taro everywhere else. So, I think California should grow, like Florida has a lot of taro. It's kind of considered swamp plants, but nevertheless, it's edible.
And it requires water like rice, am I correct?
Well, you can grow rice and taro dryland, so it doesn't have to have water, and that's something very interesting. My dad went around the world growing rice in a specific way called the system of rice intensification, and it uses less water and no fertilizers or pesticides. So if you want to look up the system of rice intensification, it's a very interesting concept. So we can grow these, staples and not use it in the old way of flooding the fields.
It's interesting. Just one more quick comment, and then we move on. But there's another Indigenous woman who's a botanist. This original Chumash woman I spoke of, young woman, was a botanist, got her PhD in religious studies, studying herbal plants through the biology department. So she was a botanist and studied Indigenous religious systems. But there's another author, Robin Wall Kimmerer. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Everybody's probably familiar with her.
Yes, love Robin.
She made a really interesting statement the other day on something, a TED Talk or something, or an interview I saw with her about with climate change, how plants are at a disadvantage because they can't move, but people can help them move. And in relationship to your idea of canoe plants or voyaging plants, she seemed in a sense to be supporting that idea that we might need to help plants, give them a little edge by helping them move as the climate changes. So somehow all those are tied together. It'll give me a lot to think about, but thank you for your comments.
It's interesting to think about all these things, you know, like with climate. I think the plants will know way better than we will, quite honestly. They'll tell us what to do.
Interesting.
If we take time to listen. I think you do have a little bit of experience, don't you, Brynn, with acorns and the native tribes of California? And did acorns not provide a meal or flour that was somewhat akin to that which one would get from the kalo?
I've been studying or wanting to study more about acorn flour, and I've been visiting some places where a lot of the tribes have been making or used to make, you know, grind it in the stone. You know, I do know some people up in Northern California who are, you know, have done that because of that's their culture. So I can put, you know, like a link later if anybody's interested in learning more about that. I can't speak directly because I'm not, you know, I haven't grown up doing that, but I do know the people that do that. And I think it's something we should all be, you know, focused on, is eating more of these indigenous foods to the area, and especially indigenous foods like acorns, you know, acorn flour. How amazing would it be to eat baked goods using these kind of these plants, because they're plant-based fiber, plant-based protein. You know, I just am very excited about the future and seeing more indigenous foods be available, and supporting these makers who have this in their, you know, lineage, and supporting them.
You wonder if that's not why California, the acorns and oak trees are dying out in California to quite an extent, is because we don't use them. You do have to leach acorns, different probably than taro, but or callow. But
yeah, that you have to also, you know, cook taro. There's different phytochemicals that need to be processed out, and you know, that's why the indigenous First Peoples knew how to do that very well. We've forgotten that in food processing a lot. We just do, you know, want to modify it in different ways, where if we just use, you know, these older heirloom varieties and learned how, you know, the processing of our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, they knew how to do all these things. So bringing that back into our everyday meals is really what I'm excited to see happening going forward.
so much to learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can imagine that it really took a lot of attunement to nature for these ancient processes to be found, to be discovered, because they don't seem to be like using lye, for example, to bleach the acorns. Like, who would have thought of that? Well, maybe somebody who was really listening and just kind of allowed themselves to be directed to what it was that plant needed for its processing and for assimilation by human beings.
Listening is something we should all be doing for every part of our life.
Yeah. I wanted to give a chance for Robert, Sharon, and Mari to share something if they'd like before we wrap up.
I'm always reminded that when we're talking about frequencies of nature, that waves are, you know, nothing but a frequency that's passing through the water. For some reason, I find that very therapeutic. I mean, you can ask my wife. I don't often go surfing for, you know, like to have fun or anything anymore. I go for therapy. I go to the beach and ride waves for therapy. And I come back and it works really well. It's an excellent therapy. course, a lot of surfers know that. But I'm very appreciative that Brynn talking about how the various kinds of plants really are different kinds of light. I'd forgotten about that. But then I'm also wondered about, I don't know if you addressed this, but that Kalo, isn't it in mythology that it comes from a stillborn child of the creative forces? They had a child, but it was stillborn, so they buried it. And then the Kalo grew from that. And it was meant to be the food for Hawaiians, the basic nutritional element for Hawaiians. I wonder if you knew anything about that.
I know a lot of other people that are, better at telling the story than I am, but Haloa and Kalo was, from Haloa is what I was told, and that is our brother. But that's the thing, is Taro is made for everybody to eat and to, the Hawaiians had a very special, the Kanaka Maoli had a very special relationship with Kalo and kind of took it to an expert status, but it was available all around the world. And so that's what's very interesting is, it's our brother, and every part of the plant, the ohana, it's the keiki, it's the oha, everything is connected. It's our family. And so when we treat the plant like our family, we are reconnected to our community. And if we think about it in that way, I think everybody can, feel a connection, whether you're Kanaka Maoli or not, but everybody can be a family. So yes, it's an interesting story. And I love all the creation stories of all the, first peoples. I really love hearing about their connection to the land, because I was just in Arizona and went to a space where, the tribe believed they came out of the earth. And, and I saw a taro growing in Arizona. I said, that's our creation, that's related to ours. So it just felt so, there's so many ways of connecting and listening to nature by just even walking the lands.
Well, I think I want to, before I ask Sarah if she would be so kind to give our vote of thanks to Brynn, but before I did that, I did want to mention one more thing in regard to this idea of allowing nature to speak. And I believe it came from the same Chumash woman that Donna Moore was talking about. And it's very much related to the Hawaiian practice of la'au lapa'au, which is our Hawaiian healing through plants. And that is this: when the Chumash healer would go into nature to collect those plants that they would use for whatever tea or poultice, etc., that they were going to make for the person who needed healing. At that point in time, they would make themselves particularly open to kind of receiving the message from the plants themselves. Like, it wasn't enough to collect the plant from a certain variety. One had to collect exactly the plant that would be needed for that particular person. I mean, the exact stock of the plant that would most help that person. And then that is what they would use. They were listening at that intuitive of a level to be able to work the healing that they needed to do for the person. So Sarah, could I ask you to kindly give our vote of thanks?
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Brynn, for joining us here, taking some time. And just for the story that you've shared, Renee and I spoke to you some months ago and just were so inspired by the work that you're doing. and the resilience, because it really takes resilience to go through this process and continue to uncover things and get through the challenges. And it's just beautiful work that you do. It's work that we need people to be doing. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think always going back to knowing Kalo, that was the huli, the stalk, that was touched so many times. It's a plant that you have to use that to plant. So if we remember that, that has gone on generations and generations and generations. And that's what going forward we can do. If that's all we can do, then that's, I think, amazing in my view. And if I can do that, I would just feel, passing it forward. So I don't feel like I've done anything except just what my ancestors have wanted us to do. We're the ancestors that we've been waiting for. We don't have, we have to carry on, and knowing that stock was touched, thousands and thousands of more Kalo plants. I just am very grateful that I have that blueprint that I can take forward for my children, for my future. So that would just be my call to action, is look at Taro and look at it in maybe a new way or a different way, and get familiar with it. Plant it in your home, plant it in your garden, your farm, whatever you can do. Try and eat it in different ways. That would be most amazing.
Thank you so much, Brynn. You've really been a treasure for us. Real round of applause to Brynn for joining us today, and you're always welcome in the future. Thank you so much.